Alright, so other than those artists you just mentioned, do you see any other promising artists that you think could have the potential of being inducted in the next 10 or so years?
I think it's interesting with this 25-year rule, the way music has changed and the way the industry's changed, because labels aren't as important as they once were. You know? And music being on the internet and the way radio is now, it's so homogenized because you had two large syndicates roll up the stations and everything's formatted. You got radio doctors that, you know, one time all the music was played on one station. You would hear hip hop right next to straight ahead rock and roll or folk rock or country rock, and that's not the case anymore. And you see artists now being hard pressed to have, we think, long careers, like, you know, the Stones or the Beatles. I don't know if we'll ever see those kinds of groups again, partly because of the nature of the business. I hope we do. But when you look at who's out there, there's a group that's been around a lot longer than most people think. In fact, this will be their 21st or 22nd year. That will be eligible in a couple of years, and that's Green Day.
Wow.
They've been around since '90, I believe. You've got Nirvana coming up eventually, which I think, you know, even though the group didn't last long, incredibly important in their influence. And then Dave Matthews, who, if it continues, again, you know, jam bands are so important. Fish. Will these bands be inducted? Very possibly. Their influence is extraordinary. I mean, the whole idea of when Genesis was inducted a couple of years ago, and one of my friends who used to work at the museum and now is a writer at Rolling Stone, Andy Green, was interviewing the guys at Genesis, and Fish was the group that played for Genesis. Phil Collins doesn't play anymore. He's got his hands because he doesn't play. And Peter Gabriel was on tour. So they didn't have the whole band there, so they didn't want to play, so Fish agreed to do a tribute and played three Genesis songs. So the writer, Andy, asked them about Fish. Well, they thought that Fish was a guy who had a nickname named Fish who was in a band in the UK. They had never heard of the band Fish. And then Andy went on to explain they were a jam band and explain what that meant. And the guys in Genesis said, wait a minute, they don't have songs, they don't have music. So, you know, we used to play long songs, but we had music. And he was explaining how these bands just keep playing. So even as recently as that, this whole concept of jam bands has become so important. And I think there'll be a huge number of those bands inducted. So yeah, they're out there. I don't think there are as many as we once had, and we've inducted so many of the giants, that what's happening now with the induction process is we're reaching back and inducting some of the groups we passed over, maybe like a Hall & Oates, you know, somebody like that sort of thing. Rush, I get so much mail about Rush.
Yeah, I love
Rush, Chicago, Kiss, Moody Blues. Those are the artists I get the most of my email about that are not inducted. So I'm hoping we get there.
Can you tell us about your favorite induction moment of the past decade or so? Because I know you go to all of these events, right?
Yeah, I have a favorite. And it was, the good news is we finally released a compilation of all the inductions in the first 25 years. And the reason that's really difficult because you have to go get the rights for all the images and all the music. And that's really hard. But we put out a lot of it. And one moment that people kept taking off of YouTube and asking us to send them was when George Harrison was inducted. It happened to be the same time that Prince was inducted. And for George, they played When My Guitar Gently Weeps. And Prince played the solo. And if you get a chance, I suspect it's on YouTube, go see that number with Prince, where he comes out in his brilliant red suit, matching red shirt, and I think he may have had a red guitar, I'm not sure, but he plays an incredible solo, and then he leans at the edge of the stage and pretends to fall off the stage. He's caught by a bodyguard, and they push him back up on stage while he's still playing. And then when he finishes, he takes his guitar off and throws it in the audience. Of course, his bodyguard caught it. But you know, not only the flashiness of it, but also just the simple fact that the musicality was so great. So that's one of my favorites. Bono came off the stage when U2 was inducted, grabbed a bottle of champagne off the table, popped the cork, and sprayed the audience. That was really cool. And then this year, when Neil Diamond was inducted, he came down in the audience and sang "Sweet Caroline," and stuck a mic in Bruce Springsteen's face and asked him to sing one chorus, which he did. There's no kind of, and the speeches again in the videos, to see the speeches when, like, Tom Waits was inducted this year, and Tom said, one of the lines he had was, he said, you know, they say I've not had any hits and I'm really hard to work with, and I say, well, what's wrong with that? You know? So you get some great moments in the speeches and in the music.
You mentioned your collection earlier. Can you tell us what kind of artists you have in your collection and what else you collect?
Yeah, I got my first record in 1948, and it was a country record, and I collect everything but polka records, and it gets me in a lot of trouble. It gets me in a lot of trouble in Cleveland because the Polka Hall of Fame was also in Cleveland. And a lot of great polka artists came out of Cleveland. In fact, in the 50s, a lot of recording studios in Cleveland, a lot of the rock and roll songs recorded in Cleveland had polka bands doubling over because it wasn't enough work to do both. You know, do one thing, so they had to do both. But I collect, you know, rhythm and blues, straight ahead rock, hip hop. I collect soundtracks, original cast, dance records, 12-inch dance music, one of my favorite. Christmas records, comedy records. I have 33s, 78s, 45s, and do you kids know what the 4th speed was? There were 4 speeds of records.
I'd like to use a lifeline. I'll use my Ask a Terry Stewart lifeline, please.
16 RPMs were used largely for spoken words, and they were used for transcripts on radios, because if you had these giant transcriptions, you put them on a big table, and late at night particularly, you could let them run and run and run. You didn't have to have people like yourself sitting at the mic. So I collect almost everything. I on Tuesdays, when we have a store in the museum, and on Tuesday when the new material comes out, I try to read all the reviews and, you know, see what's coming out, see if I like it, and I try, I try to find a new drug all the time. That's what music is to me. It's just like going to live shows, seeing who you can perform. You know, it's like the other night, my wife and I, we had a black tie event we had to go to, but I was dying to see KT Tunstall, and I'd never seen her, and I didn't know it was a one-woman show. She's by herself, and she's on stage with sync tracks, and she had about 8 different guitars, and she just tore the place up. It was one of those moments when if you ever go into a club and you sort of, this should be okay, and you go in and you go, holy. I mean, just blew me away. I mean, I went back and told her. She toured the museum that day, and she talked about it on stage, and she was so excited. The thing excited, they let her hold one of Muddy Waters' guitars, and so she was very excited about that. You know, and like I tell everybody, that probably one of the greatest live acts in America right now is a guy named Trombone Shorty. If you haven't seen Trombone Shorty from New Orleans, you know, he's a quadruple threat. He's the greatest trombone player coming out of New Orleans, the greatest trumpet player coming out of New Orleans. He's a great singer, he writes his own songs, and he dances like James Brown. So you have this incredible combination in these shows. So, yeah, you know, right now, you know, I'm listening to Neon Trees. I like One Republic. I like The Script. What's that band from Jersey? The guy from Jersey. It sounds like Bruce. Anthem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. So I mean, I'm constantly looking for something new. The new Adele album is a fabulous album.
That is a great album.
She's got an extraordinary voice. She really does. Yeah.
We actually play a bunch of those indie artists you mentioned on our station, so.
Well, you have good taste too, then.
Yeah.
Well, we're an independent music station.
Independent music station. You know, mostly indie, alternative rock, but there's a lot of different music. We've got hip-hop shows, we've got a jazz show, so that's just a little bit about our station. But back to the questions about you. So, do you have any other hobbies or interests outside of rock and roll? Maybe a fun fact about you?
Oh, well, I am an inveterate collector, so I have, over the years, collected jukeboxes,
Wow.
neon clocks, vintage motor scooters. I once dated a girl because she was an extra in Quadrophenia. If you ever seen the film, The Mods and the Rockers, you know, the whole period in Britain when you had kids on motor scooters chasing guys on motorcycles and that sort of thing. Coca-Cola stuff, clothes, you know. I just, you know, stuff fills my life, and my wife is very, very disconsolate about the whole problem. She wishes I would minimalize my life. And as I'm getting old here, I'm trying to do that, but it's a really hard thing to get rid of all this stuff. You know, the records will always be there, and I think to some extent, so will the neon clocks and the jukeboxes.